From New York, the epicenter of the pandemic in the United States, this is Democracy Now!
One of the forecasters said to me, we were looking at a freight train coming across the country. We're now looking at a bullet train because the numbers are going up that quickly.
New York City has 60% of all the new coronavirus cases in the United States. It's responsible for half the cases all over the country. The peak is weeks away, but hospitals are already encountering shortages of equipment needed to protect medical workers and to keep patients alive. We'll get an update from emergency room nurses on the front lines. Then to Spain, fast becoming the other epicenter of Europe as the number of cases in Italy goes down. Finally, to Puerto Rico. We'll speak with San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz.
Las restricciones del estatus político de Puerto Rico nos prohíben en este momento.
The restrictions of Puerto Rico's political status prohibit us at this moment from using tests that are available and are reliable around the world. That
All
is the
that
truth.
and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. U.S. Senate leaders have reached a deal with the White House on an unprecedented $2 trillion stimulus package to battle economic freefall caused by the coronavirus pandemic. The Senate deal would send $1,200 checks to most American adults with another $500 per child. It would create a $500 billion program to loan money to U.S. corporations and municipal governments, overseen by an inspector general and an oversight board. Another $367 billion would go toward a small business loan program. Hospitals would receive $130 billion, and state and local governments would get $150 billion in assistance. Progressive critics are calling for grants, not loans, to small businesses and warned the bailout centerpiece, the $500 billion loan program, could become a slush fund for corporate America. This is New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez speaking on MSNBC.
If we do not get this right, we risk small businesses across the country shutting down and big businesses experiencing a total payday with lack of accountability, further consolidating our economy. And that will create a generational issue. If we think income inequality is bad now, we really need to make sure that we get this right to prevent the worst possible outcome.
An unemployment provision added to the Senate bill by Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders would see laid-off workers receive 100% of their salary, up to $75,000 a year, with tipped and gig economy workers covered. Economists at Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs estimate the U.S. gross domestic product could plummet by 30% next quarter, driving unemployment to nearly 13%. Here in New York, the epicenter of COVID-19 pandemic in the United States, Governor Andrew Cuomo blasted the Trump administration Tuesday for failing to respond to the magnitude of the crisis. Governor Cuomo says hospitals are already encountering shortages of equipment, including ventilators, crucial to keeping patients alive when COVID-19 cases peak, which officials now predict could come in as little as 2 or 3 weeks.
FEMA is sending us 400 ventilators. 400 ventilators? I need 30,000 ventilators. You want a pat on the back for sending 400 ventilators? What am I going to do with 400 ventilators when I need 30,000? You pick the 26,000 people who are going to die because you only sent 400 ventilators.
After Cuomo's criticism, Vice President Mike Pence said the federal government was sending 2,000 ventilators to New York. Speaking on Fox News, President Trump hinted more federal aid might be contingent on Cuomo and other governors ending their criticism of the White House.
No, I think we're doing very well. But, you know, it's a two-way street. They have to treat us well also.
New York has more than half the total confirmed coronavirus cases in the United States, though that's partly due to a massive increase in the number of tests carried out in recent days. Almost half the cases in New York are among people less than 45 years in age, from 18 to 45. Across the United States, doctors and nurses report a critical lack of personal protective equipment, or PPE, endangering their health and safety. The hashtag #GetUsPPE trended on social media, with medical workers reporting they've been forced to reuse a single N95 protective mask throughout the day, or even for days at a time, against standard protocol of changing masks for each patient. In Georgia, state officials say 2 healthcare workers who died late last week tested positive for COVID-19. In California, Governor Gavin Newsom said his state is 50,000 hospital beds short of what will be needed when COVID-19 cases reach their peak. Newsom says California is looking to procure more than 500 million masks and 1 billion gloves. In Los Angeles, where confirmed coronavirus cases reached 660 Tuesday, a 17-year-old has died from coronavirus infection, becoming the first known minor to die in the United States. In Washington, officials are inspecting infection controls at nursing homes statewide after finding the Life Care Center of Kirkland failed to identify and protect sick residents, failed to alert health officials about an outbreak of respiratory illness, and had no backup plan after the center's primary doctor fell ill from COVID-19. The outbreak at the long-term care center killed at least 37 people. New Jersey, which is second to New York among known coronavirus cases in the United States, reported its biggest single-day jump in confirmed cases, with 3,700 as New Jersey's death toll reached 44. In Minnesota, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan reported her brother, Ron Golden, died in a Tennessee hospital over the weekend after contracting COVID-19. And Minnesota Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar, the late presidential candidate, now senator, says her husband, John Bessler, remains hospitalized with serious COVID-19 symptoms. Senator Klobuchar spoke to Good Morning America Tuesday.
Well, today he's still on oxygen. The reason he was hospitalized is he had pneumonia. He was coughing up blood, and his oxygen levels were dangerously low. So he's been there for a few days now.
Amy Klobuchar is in Minnesota. Her husband is on the East Coast, hospitalized. As U.S. coronavirus cases continue to grow on an exponential curve Tuesday, with the number of known cases topping 54,000, President Trump said he hoped to reopen the U.S. economy and end restrictions aimed at slowing the spread by Easter Sunday, less than 3 weeks from now.
So I think Easter Sunday, and you'll have packed churches all over our country. I think it would be a beautiful time.
His deadline of Easter Sunday defies all of his scientific advisors. In Virginia, Christian evangelical leader Jerry Falwell, Jr. defied calls for the closure of Liberty University, where he serves as president, welcoming thousands of students back from spring break, ordering faculty members to report to campus. Falwell is one of President Trump's most prominent supporters. In Florida, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis asked people over 65 and anyone who's traveled from New York State over the last 3 weeks to self-isolate for 14 days. Governor DeSantis has not ordered a statewide lockdown, and some Florida beaches remain open. In immigration news, documents obtained by The Nation magazine show Immigration and Customs Enforcement has quarantined 9 prisoners and is monitoring at least 24 others across 10 immigration jails for symptoms of COVID-19. The documents also show Customs and Border Protection is working to convert several of its major border facilities into quarantine sites. This comes as BuzzFeed reports an immigrant held at an immigration jail in New Jersey has become the first person under ICE custody to test positive for COVID-19 in the U.S. At the U.S.-Mexico border, the Trump administration says it'll delay all hearings scheduled for the next month for asylum seekers who've been forced to remain in Mexico. Meanwhile, all 3 immigration courts in New York are now temporarily closed after a court employee tested positive for COVID-19. In more news from New York, Mayor Bill de Blasio says at least 300 nonviolent prisoners will be released from Rikers Island. This comes as at least 38 Rikers prisoners and staff have tested positive for COVID-19. At Rikers Island, more than 60 people have tested positive for coronavirus. In Alden, New York, dozens of correction officers working at the Wendy Correctional Facility are now in quarantine, fearing exposure to the coronavirus after transferring 2 prisoners, including convicted rapist Harvey Weinstein, who tested positive for COVID-19 this week. In Geneva, Switzerland, the World Health Organization warned Tuesday the United States is becoming the next epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic, with over 12% of the world's 435,000 documented cases, though the true number of infections, both in the U.S. and worldwide, is certain to be far higher. Across Africa, finance ministers are demanding the International Monetary Fund and World Bank suspend debt payments to free up $44 billion in funds to fight the pandemic. In India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has ordered the entire nation of 1.3 billion people to remain at home for the next 3 weeks. Italy recorded another 743 deaths over a 24-hour period, reversing a trend that saw daily deaths decline slightly. Over 6,800 people have died from COVID-19 in Italy. France reported its nationwide death toll has topped 1,000, as a top medical official warned the true toll is probably higher, with those dying at home or in retirement homes left uncounted. Spain has recorded over 3,400 deaths among some more than 47,000 COVID-19 infections. Among those battling the disease is Baltasar Garzón, the 64-year-old jurist who's defended WikiLeaks' Julian Assange and ordered the arrest of Chilean ex-dictator Augusto Pinochet in 1998 on torture and genocide charges. Garzón was just hospitalized with respiratory failure due to the virus, the doctors believe. The British government is calling for 250,000 volunteers to help battle the pandemic, as authorities in London began converting the Excel Exhibition Centre into a field hospital where as many as 4,000 people will be treated. Among the infected is Prince Charles, the 71-year-old heir to the British throne, who's reportedly self-isolating with mild COVID-19 symptoms. In Brazil, the governor of Sao Paulo state ordered 46 million residents to shelter in place Tuesday, with all non-essential services closed. Far-right President Jair Bolsonaro blasted the order, urging Brazilians to get back to work.
The livelihoods of families must be safeguarded. We must return to normality. There are a few state and municipal authorities that must abandon scorched earth policies, such as a ban on transportation, closing businesses, and mass confinement.
A close ally of President Trump, Brazilian President Bolsonaro, has dismissed COVID-19 as a little flu that he could easily survive because of his athleticism. In Mexico, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has defied calls to lock down the nation to slow the spread of the coronavirus, declaring, quote, "We're going to keep living life as usual." And in South Sudan, massive swarms of locusts are devastating food crops across the country, further endangering a population that already faces the highest rate of food insecurity in the world. The desert locusts have swarmed across East Africa in numbers not seen since the early 2000s, with some climate scientists warning that worsening heat waves and tropical cyclones are making the swarms worse. This is South Sudanese farmer Lotak Joseph Okwara.
We are worried a lot because this year, if the government or NGOs fail to help us to destroy this thing, we will really be in a big problem of hunger.
Aid groups say increased hunger will only worsen problems for more than 200,000 people living in cramped United Nations camps who are now at risk of COVID-19 infection. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I am Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting from the epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic in the United States, New York City, with my co-host Juan Gonzalez in New Jersey, with the second most coronavirus cases in the country. The New York metro area has 60% of all the new coronavirus cases in the United States and is responsible for half the cases all over the country. The death toll in New York is 271, with more than 26,000 confirmed cases. Almost half the cases in New York are among people between the ages of 18 and 45 years in age. Federal officials say anyone who travels from New York City should self-quarantine for 14 days. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo said Tuesday the number of hospitalizations is expected to peak in the next 40 days. 4 temporary hospital sites will be built to address the shortfall of hospital beds, including one at the Jacob Javits Convention Center in Midtown Manhattan. Cuomo blasted the Trump administration for failing to respond to the magnitude of the crisis and said hospitals are already encountering shortages of equipment needed to protect medical workers and to keep patients alive.
FEMA is sending us 400 ventilators. 400 ventilators? I need 30,000 ventilators. You want a pat on the back for sending 400 ventilators? What am I going to do with 400 ventilators when I need 30,000? You pick the 26,000 people who are going to die because you only sent 400 ventilators.
Many hospitals in New York say they're already down to their last weeks of personal protective equipment to keep frontline medical workers from contracting COVID-19. Some are being forced to reuse single-use masks. If they get sick, hospitals will face even greater staff shortages amidst the outbreak. For more, we're joined by 2 people who are working on the front lines of this pandemic. Sean Petty is a registered nurse in the pediatric emergency room of Jacobi Hospital in the Bronx. He's a member of the board of directors of the New York State Nurses Association. Next to him is Kelly Cabrera, an emergency room nurse there as well. And, of course, co-hosting from his home in New Brunswick, New Jersey, is Juan Gonzalez. Sean, let's begin with you. Can you describe the conditions at your hospital? What do you need? What do you have?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing that we need for first and foremost is we need N95 masks. N95s are the only proven prevention in terms of masks for healthcare workers for N95 or for COVID-19. In Wuhan, China, they once they realized that healthcare workers were becoming infected, and they imported 42,000 healthcare workers to help with the crisis. They outfitted them with N95 masks and full protective equipment, personal protective equipment, or PPE as we call it, and they achieved an unbelievable 0 out of 42,000. Non-infection rate. So 0 healthcare workers out of 42,000 with full PPE were infected after they were imported into Wuhan, China. So we know that N95s are the only significant protection that we have against this virus, and they are the item that is in most severe shortage in this country. Just this morning, as I was walking into the hospital, and we started hearing about reports of this last night. Our command center has been telling nurses that the one N95 mask that they are distributing is the only N95 mask that they're going to be getting for an entire week. So this is a profound...
Now, I just want to be clear on how unusual this is. The head of the American Medical Association said, if you did something like that, reuse a mask, it would have been grounds for dismissal in the past. Talk about the significance of what it means to reuse your mask, Sean, seeing patient after patient who are suffering from this highly contagious disease.
100%, Amy. We would have absolutely been brought up on charges and possibly terminated for reusing a mask in the future. The CDC guidelines from the beginning of this outbreak, were that COVID-19 patients were to be treated with airborne and contact precautions, which necessitates an N95 mask by federal guidelines. They rolled those back, caving into pressure from the hospital associations that were talking about their shortage. So they rolled their guidelines back, not by science, but because of science, but because of the shortage. And so that allowed the hospitals to ration these masks in that way. And so what it means is that we use a mask, we touch the mask, we take care of patients. Our hands could potentially become contaminated. Our hands then contaminate our mask. And then when we reuse it, we potentially contaminate ourselves, and then we're putting other patients at risk. Now, we take care of patients who are suspected of COVID-19. We take care of patients who have COVID-19, and we take care of patients who don't have any symptoms of COVID-19. So we, of course, as healthcare workers, then are not only infecting ourselves, not only infecting each other as healthcare workers, because it's very difficult to practice social distancing in a healthcare setting when you're, like me and Kelly are, in traumas, in tight quarters, taking care of patients. We're infecting each other, and we're potentially infecting other patients. So to contaminate our own masks and to compromise the integrity of those masks repeatedly makes those masks absolutely useless at a certain point. And you're absolutely right that this is something that is not something that the hospitals would have disciplined nurses prior to this, and something that they're mandating us to do in this current context.
Kelly Cabrera, I'd like to ask you about another critical component of the best possible care, the issue of ventilators. We heard Governor Cuomo blast the federal government for not providing sufficient numbers of ventilators. What's the situation in your hospital with ventilators?
So I work at the same hospital as Sean, in the adult emergency room. And so I am taking care of the older population. And we have been seeing, as you guys had stated before, the numbers between 18 and 45, like those numbers are a lot higher. We know we don't have enough. It's a discussion that doctors are having, that nurses are having. It's a conversation that is way out in the open. Previously, prior to coronavirus, if there was a patient coming in who we knew needed a ventilator, it was no questions asked. You went in and you provided that care, and that was it. And we're starting to see those situations where, unfortunately, we have to debate, is it worth it's horrible to say it this way, but it really have to debate, is it worth exposing all of our workers when we know that we don't have the right equipment, and when we know the machines aren't going to be enough? So those conversations are starting to happen. I've heard at other facilities in the Bronx already that ventilators have run out. For us, that hasn't happened yet, but it's definitely not looking good. It's going to happen, and it's a conversation that unfortunately we're forced to have now.
And I'd also like to ask you, Kelly, about the Governor Cuomo has asked all the hospitals to increase capacity by 50% in terms of beds. Have you seen that process begin in your hospital? And, of course, increasing the number of beds also requires having more staff as well to deal with those beds. How has that been playing out in your hospital?
That is starting to happen now. I think a really big message here is that we have to remember that a lot of the issues that we're seeing come up now, they're not new issues. So prior to coronavirus, we were already holding patients in our emergency room for days at a time, not just our emergency room. I know that this happens across the country in several hospitals because hospitals have always been stretched to their limit. So now we're just adding the stress of a pandemic to it, and it's pushing us to new places we've never seen before. So we have opened up new spaces in the hospital. Prior to this, we had advocated for that space before for the previous patients that we were holding in the emergency room, and now that space is being used by shuffling other patients in the hospital to that empty space in order to make more rooms on the floors for more ICU patients. I know there's been conversions of different units into, they're specifically going to be for ICUs. Yesterday, our waiting room they started construction in our waiting room to expand an area for where these patients will be taken care of. Like they are building a wall within our waiting room because we have to do it one way or another. Like, to increase 50% capacity, it's making us do the craziest things. We're putting patients together that perhaps we wouldn't have put together before. We're trying to put people, the biggest issue right now is space, lack of equipment, lack of ventilators, but we know that the surge is going to happen, and all we're trying to do is best prepare for it. And unfortunately, it's making us make some really hard decisions.
Kelly Cabrera, can you talk more about testing of healthcare workers like you? What kind of access do you have to healthcare tests? I mean, I believe something like 4 in 5 cases, people are infected by people who are asymptomatic. Now, certainly you are on the front line. You're using and reusing your protective equipment. If you're feeling sick, what kind of access do you get to tests? And then how long do you have to wait and work while you might not be feeling well before you get results?
So we've been told that if we don't feel well, we are supposed to, we should be going home. It's kind of what's being said. However, we know I've experienced, from speaking to other, from other workers that have gone through this, it's basically you have to have a fever, body aches, and they ask you basically the same symptoms as we would ask any other patient that comes into the emergency room. However, for us, we have to, it's not guaranteed that we're going to get a test just because we work on the front lines. So initially we were advocating for that, being that we knew that a lot of us were getting exposed, and obviously we might not display symptoms and we might be passing it along to other people. But I think from what the mayor had said as well, it's just we have to all basically assume that we have it. From other workers that I've heard that have been tested, and have been told that they are positive, they are to stay at they're to stay at home for 7 days and then wait the 3 days, have at least 3 days without a fever before being able to return to work. It's not guaranteed that we're going to get tested at all. We have to go through the same process. We have to call 311. I believe our hospital also has a different hotline for us as well. But basically, we're following the same guidelines as the general public, even though we have arguably the most exposure.
I'd like to ask Sean, going back to this issue of hospital capacity, over the last few decades, and certainly during the period that Governor Cuomo has been in office, the number of beds available per patient in the United States and many states has declined dramatically, mostly because hospital managers see empty beds as not money-making, so they want to reduce the number of empty beds as much as possible, so they staff fewer and fewer beds. Could you talk about these past policies, and now with this sudden crisis, how the chickens have come home to roost in terms of this maximum bottom line for hospitals?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just add that it's not just hospital managers. It's actually, all of the people who are making political and economic decisions around public health in the city and the state. So, for instance, I would call Governor Cuomo probably the single most important person in terms of the drive to close down hospital beds in this state over the last 20 years. In New York State, we've gone from 73,000 beds to 53,000 beds from the year 2000 to the present time. So specifically because of policies that Governor Cuomo has pursued, we are now 20,000 beds behind where we need to be in terms of trying to scale up our capacity to these unprecedented levels. Governor Cuomo estimates, I think this week, that we need 140,000 hospital beds to have enough capacity to treat patients that need oxygenation and hospitalization during this crisis. So we're starting at 53,000 instead of 73,000 to scale up to this. To scale up to the need that is being estimated. So the way Governor Cuomo did that is he came up with a hospital bed closure commission. It was called the Berger Commission. And he also has had now 2 rounds of Medicaid cuts. The first, they're called the Medicaid redesign teams. The second Medicaid redesign team just made a recommendation for massive Medicaid cuts, including specific cuts to the city hospital system where we work, just in the last 2 weeks. So Governor Cuomo is currently trying to reduce Medicaid spending in the state by almost $2.5 billion during this pandemic. So, and this, it will absolutely result in a decrease in healthcare capacity and keep the state from getting matching federal dollars for Medicaid spending. So it's unfathomable to somebody like myself, somebody who has worked in a public hospital for 12 years and has seen these cuts, seen the resulting decrease in staffing, seen the resulting decrease in services. We had to fight a couple years ago just to keep our pediatric trauma center open in the Bronx, the only pediatric trauma center that serves the entire borough of the Bronx and southern Westchester County. We had to fight to keep it open because of these Medicaid cuts. We thankfully won that fight, but we have been at a severe state of precarity when it comes to having these services available over the last decade going into this pandemic. So, and these are because of these specific policies of Medicaid cuts and hospital closures that have been explicitly pursued. And it's very easy to find all of the quotes from Governor Cuomo, from the Medicaid redesign teams, from the Berger Commission about these hospital closures in New York State over the last 2 decades.
Oh, and we don't want to keep you, Sean. We know you're right now scheduled to go on duty. What gives you the courage to be there day after day with the massive exposure that you have?
Well, I think a sense of duty to my patients. If we don't show up, if we're not there, nobody else is going to be. And I would also just add that I know nurses are getting a lot of attention right now, but it's also our housekeepers are heroes right now. Our nurses' aides are heroes right now. The doctors, we all are coming to work. We all are doing making Herculean efforts to make this thing work. We all are exposing ourselves to these risks. And we know that we're at the very tip of the iceberg. And so, but if not us, who else is going to do it? And we only ask, we do this, I've done this for 12 years. Kelly's done it for 6 years. We do this every day. We face adverse conditions every day. We face going into battle, short-staffed. We face these things. So it's something we're used to. It's something we're prepared for. What I think undermines that courage and undermines that morale, for us and our coworkers, is that our government doesn't have our back. That the Trump administration and the federal authorities have done virtually nothing to get us the armor and the supplies that we need in this war against coronavirus.
Sean Petty, I want to thank you so much for being with us, joining us from Jacobi Hospital in the Bronx, pediatric emergency room nurse. And thank you so much to Kelly Cabrera, emergency room nurse as well. When we come back, we go to Spain, which now has more than 47,000 confirmed cases, nearly 3,500 deaths, the second highest number in the world after Italy. Among the hardest hit in Spain are the healthcare workers as well. Stay with us. Soul Makossa by the great African funk saxophonist Manu Dibango, who has died at the age of 86 from COVID-19. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. In the music we were just playing, for those watching online or television around the world, we were showing dancing doctors and medical workers from China to Iran who are getting up their energy to deal with this massive pandemic. We turn now to Spain, one of the epicenters of the pandemic in Europe, with over 47,000 confirmed cases and nearly 3,500 deaths, the second highest number in the world after Italy. The number of new infections in Spain has multiplied at a rate of 20% in the last 24 hours. Health workers account for nearly 14% of Spain's infections. Many face limited availability of protective equipment. So many people have died that Madrid's municipal funeral home has stopped collecting bodies. A large ice skating rink is now being used as a makeshift morgue. Not far from the rink, the venue for last year's UN Climate Summit, the IFEMA, has been converted into a hospital ward with thousands of beds. Spain's government has opened an investigation after soldiers found unattended bodies in some of the nursing homes the military has been disinfecting. As Spain faces its second week of lockdown, the government plans to extend the state of emergency by another 15 days in order to stop the spread of the coronavirus. For more, we go to Madrid for an update from Maria Carrion, former Democracy Now! Producer, journalist in Spain, head of FISAHARA, a film festival that airs in the Sahrawi refugee camps of Algeria. It's great to have you back, Maria. You've been now on lockdown for 2 weeks with your family in the heart of Madrid, which is the epicenter of the epicenter, Spain, as it's fast surpassing Italy in its rate of infection. Talk about what's happening now and what the president is about to announce.
Well, as you mentioned, this is ground zero in Spain for a number of deaths and infections. We have over 1,500 deaths in Madrid. So if Madrid was a country, it would actually be fifth in terms of death rate in the entire world between Iran and France. So we have, this is day 12 of the lockdown. Everybody seems to be following it with very few exceptions. Hospitals are beginning to be overrun with cases of coronavirus. The ICU units are at capacity, and we have a scarcity of every kind of material that you can possibly imagine. So this is a repeat of what happened both in China and in Italy. Catalonia, the region of Catalonia, is also hard hit. It is now has the highest infection rate, new infection rate in the country. And as you mentioned, 14% of healthcare workers, at least, have been infected, which has taken out over 5,000 people from giving care. They do not have the protective gear, as I was hearing Sean and Kelly speak. The same thing is happening here as well. People are having to either recycle their gear or simply just make their own with whatever is lying around at home. So today, Parliament is an empty, almost empty Parliament will be convening. So via online telematic vote, they will be debating the extension of the state of exception. The president of Spain, Pedro Sánchez, will be speaking and explaining why this needs to be extended. And we're expecting, of course, for everybody to vote for this measure and keep everyone at home, except for certain workers that
and
can
both
still leave their home.
And the vice president, Pablo Iglesias of Podemos, both of their partners are COVID-19 positive?
Their partners are COVID-19 positive, and they have gone in and out of isolation. They have broken their quarantine a few times to attend meetings, but now meetings are all at a distance. There are a lot of politicians infected. We talked about this a few days ago, and of course the list is just increasing of politicians in Spain who are either in quarantine because they've been very close to virus infections or actually have tested positive and either at home or in hospital. Garzón, we still don't know. Baltasar Garzón, the very renowned judge, we still don't know if he is positive, but it is a suspected case because he has all the symptoms and was hospitalized for respiratory distress. The most vulnerable people here, Amy, are the ones that are really of concern. You mentioned the nursing homes where these bodies were found. In the news yesterday, they were interviewing health workers, caregivers in these and other nursing homes, and the director of one of these homes, the Maravilla Center in Madrid, was running a fever, sick, but still at work and crying because she said that she didn't have backups. She suspected all of her staff was infected, but they could not stop working and caring for the elderly patients, most of which they feared were also infected and some of which had already died. So this, hearing Sean and Kelly talk about how these are pre-existing problems here too. Nursing homes have been a problem for a long time, understaffed, underfunded. These are publicly financed but privately run facilities where oversight is not very good. And so we're seeing a result of this. Our elders are dying.
Maria, I wanted to ask you about other vulnerable populations, those in the prisons of Spain, as well as the migrants. There's a huge migrant population, especially from Northern Africa in Spain. What's the situation with migrants who are perhaps in detention or in precarious living situations? Some centers are letting some people go, but it's still a pending issue. There's not enough being done both in these migrant centers where people are being held and also in prisons, jails and prisons in Spain. This is something that has not yet been dealt with. And I wanted to ask you, the New York Times had a very an amazing article today talking about medical doctors in the United States apparently hoarding potential treatments, especially these drugs, chloroquine and hydrochloroquine, that President Trump has been touting, that these doctors have been prescribing them all around the country for themselves and their family members, in essence, hoarding them. And now pharmacists are complaining that actually doctors are involved in this. Do you have any examples of health professionals there sort of looking out for themselves rather than their patients?
Very few, actually. I don't think people are paying much attention to Trump from here, so those drugs have not been hoarded that I know of. At the very beginning of the crisis, we did hear about certain doctors hoarding face masks and taking them out. There was one doctor who took all of the face masks in the hospital and took them to his village and gave them to his neighbors. But that's not generally the case, or at least it's not being reported on.
And Maria, if you could talk about the IFEMA, we were just with you working at the convention center, which has now been turned into a massive hospital. Ironically, the place where the UN Climate Summit was, and we've been dealing with this issue of the connection of climate crisis to these viruses that we're seeing increasingly, and also the skating rink, which is very personal for you, being used as a morgue.
Yes, indeed. IFEMA was converted into what is now Spain's largest hospital. It has over 1,000 beds, including also intensive care units. And it doesn't just bring in patients, coronavirus patients, who for the most part are not the most serious of cases. It also has opened a section for the unhoused. So there's about 150 beds for people who do not have shelter or are being kicked out of shelters when in the morning and they need a place to be and health care. So IFEMA has transformed itself and is now just full of beds, and hundreds of people sleep in one same wing. That's one thing. The ice rink is actually a big mall. It's located close to IFEMA, as you say, but not only that, very close to my daughter's school. It is a place where they've gone ice skating, where they regularly meet with their friends and have lunch. There's movie theaters. They've celebrated birthdays. And we all of a sudden saw all these hearses enter this place. And so my older daughter, Gabriela, said, I don't think I could go there again with my friends.
Maria, we're going to be touching back with you. Maria Carrion, former Democracy Now! Producer, living in Madrid, Spain, where she's a freelance journalist. She has been holed up with her 2 daughters and her partner for the last 2 weeks. Maria runs 3 kilometers a day in her apartment, and it's not large. That doesn't even compare to the man in France who just ran a marathon on his balcony. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we go to Puerto Rico to speak with the mayor of San Juan, Carmen Yulín Cruz. Stay with us. The Awakening by Mike Longo, a legendary jazz pianist known for playing with Dizzy Gillespie. He has died at the age of 83. The cause, the coronavirus. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez as we head to Puerto Rico, which just announced a record $787 million financial package to fight the economic impact of the pandemic. It's a bigger package than any U.S. state so far, comes as the island's death toll hits 2, with 51 cases reported. Measures include a 3-month moratorium on mortgage payments and other loans, bonuses for essential service providers, such as medical staff and police, new tablets and educational tools to improve remote education. Governor Wanda Vasquez said Puerto Rico's public sector employees will keep getting paid and small businesses and self-employed workers will receive cash to cope with the crisis. She ordered an island-wide curfew and the closing of non-essential businesses. The pandemic follows a series of devastating earthquakes in Puerto Rico earlier this year and comes as the island continues to deal with the fallout from Hurricane Maria, which devastated Puerto Rico's infrastructure and killed at least 3,000 people. For more, we're joined on the telephone by San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz, and co-hosting with us from his home in New Brunswick, New Jersey, is Juan Gonzalez. Mayor Cruz, welcome back to Democracy Now! Can you talk about what's happening now in Puerto Rico? I understand you've just opened a drive-by testing center.
Yes, that is correct. First of all, I hope everybody's safe and staying at home as much as you can. It is important to break the cycle down and ensure that those that are most vulnerable are less in the line of fire, so to speak. One of the things that we have been doing since January at the municipality is ensuring that we kept abreast of what was happening. So it gave us a little leeway to purchase masks for our first responders and for anyone that we knew, doctors and nurses, were going to be on the line of fire. It is very important that they have the equipment so that they don't get sick and reduce the amount of doctors with coronavirus. Because, you know, if you lose your doctors and you lose your nurses and your lab technicians, who's going to take care of everybody? So we started working on that. As you know, and you mentioned, we started a curfew in Puerto Rico. The 9th of March, we started taking measures in San Juan. On March 13th, we signed a contract with Quest Laboratories that provided us with an amount of tests, the PCR. Those are the testing that it's a swab that goes in your nostrils and both nostrils, and it has a 95% effectiveness ratio. So we needed to have a way that would be fast and quick for people people that had symptoms. That's very important. People have to have symptoms. Now, there are, of course, vulnerable populations like people on dialysis or cancer patients or HIV patients, which we are monitoring on a daily basis from what we call Clínica Vida, which is, we call it our life clinic, where our HIV adult and pediatrician patients, we are calling them on a daily basis to see if they have any symptoms. So we have established, let's say, a priority, because we don't have, as anybody else in the world, we don't have as many testing kits as we would like them to have. These tests are sent to California. It takes about 4 days after they get there, which they get there in 1 day, and we are already starting to receive results. In the case of San Juan, only one person has been positive from our testing at the municipality, and of course, we are sending those numbers to the state and to the CDC. It's been very effective. We thought we were going to have 25 patients a day, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Monday of this week was our first official day.
Yulene, we have a bad connection, but I want Juan to get one more question in before we move on. Juan?
Yes, Mayor, I wanted to ask you about the federal package that's being crafted, voted on, hopefully today in Congress. Often the congressional bills either exempt Puerto Rico or reduce payments to Puerto Rico compared to other states. Do you have any sense yet of whether the proposals in the Senate and in this package will include, for instance, the $1,200 payments to every American, $500 for every dependent, and also extended unemployment benefits, whether those will apply to Puerto Rico as well?
We have been told that they would, and we are currently checking on that. As you know, the bill was approved yesterday. But one of the things that I think it's evident is that with the Trump administration and FEMA, we have to continue to remind them time and time again that we are people and that we deserve to be treated with the same sense of justice, urgency, and dignity as anybody else. This past weekend, FEMA exempted everybody from the Buy America First, and they did not exempt Puerto Rico, they did not exempt Washington, D.C., and they did not exempt any of the other territories. And frankly, we had to raise hell. And I want to thank Lidia Velázquez for being a very clear voice in that area, and Benny Thompson, the congressman that chairs the Homeland Security Committee, for being strong voices for the people of Puerto Rico. I just don't know why one has to continue here in Puerto Rico and in the States to tell the Trump administration that people go before money and that this is about saving lives. It is not about politics.
Carmen Yulene Cruz, we thank you so much for being with us. Mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico, we hope to touch base with you soon with a clearer phone line. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Calls are growing for Republican Senator Richard Burr to resign after he reportedly sold up to $1.7 million worth of stock after receiving privileged briefings about the coronavirus threat to the global community months ago. ProPublica reports Burr, the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, unloaded his holdings on February 13th in 33 separate transactions. At the time, he had access to classified information about the coronavirus and was receiving daily intelligence briefings. The stock market began plummeting a week later. The news came after NPR published a secretly recorded audio tape of Senator Burr addressing business leaders and members of the elite Tar Heel Circle at a luncheon in Washington on February 27th, when the U.S. had just 15 confirmed coronavirus cases.
It is much more aggressive in its transmission than anything that we have seen in recent history. It's probably more akin to the 1918 pandemic.
Senator Burr said, quote, "It is much more aggressive in its transmission than anything that we have seen in recent history. It's probably more akin to the 1918 pandemic." Burr's actions sparked condemnation across the political spectrum, from Democratic Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York to Fox News host Tucker Carlson. Well, for more, we're joined by one of the reporters who broke the story, Derek Willis of ProPublica. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Derek. Again, joining us on Democracy Now! Video stream from his home, as so many of our guests are, to protect themselves and the community from COVID-19. Juan with us from his home in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Derek, talk about what you found. And it's not only Senator Burr, but talk about what he did.
Sure. Well, Senator Burr, as you said, made 33 separate sales transactions on February 13th of stock holdings. Now, because of the way that these stock trades are reported, we don't know the exact amounts. We have a range of amounts. And so the amounts here, they range in total between $628,000 to up to $1.7 million of value. And the thing about this is Senator Burr is not the only senator or member of Congress to trade in stocks. He's not the only person to sell stocks this year. But the volume of his trades and the timing of it, and in addition to what NPR reported about his public and private comments, they really set him apart compared to a lot of his colleagues in terms of the sort of the uniqueness of his situation. As the chair of the Intelligence Committee, Senator Burr was getting, as you said, classified briefings about threats to the nation, including from coronavirus, in the weeks before he made these trades.
And Derek, I want to ask you specifically about that. Were there particular hearings that he was privy to just before these trades occurred?
We don't know exactly what was said in these briefings. There was a Senate-wide briefing late in January about coronavirus and what it could mean that was available to all senators. Senator Burr did attend that briefing. Not every senator did. But that wasn't a classified briefing in the same way that Intelligence Committee briefings are. And so the part of this that we don't know is we don't know what he has learned in some of those classified briefings. He has said that his trades were based on public information, what he simply saw on CNBC or other networks that talked about sort of the financial aspects of the financial impacts of coronavirus.
And can you talk about the other senators? You did say, people do sell whether or not they have privileged information, but Republicans, James Inhofe of Oklahoma, Kelly Loeffler, the new senator from Georgia, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, Loeffler married to the chair and CEO of the New York Stock Exchange.
That's right. And I think, like I said, I want to make clear that Senator Burr's were sort of in a class by themselves. But with Senator Loeffler, obviously, one of the interesting aspects there is the fact or connection to the New York Stock Exchange and through her husband. Her investments, I think, are different in some respects in that they appear to be, at least from everything that we know and what she has said, they are traded by someone else, and she is informed of the trade after the fact. That's actually not uncommon for members of Congress, particularly those with significant wealth, to have sort of a third party do the trades for them. Of course, we're relying on their say-so.
We only have a minute, but Burr has called for an ethics investigation to exonerate him. But also, if you can say, so he had this information. I guess the question is also, what was he telling his constituents or the entire country at the time that President Trump was hardly taking action at this point, certainly when it came to tests and availability of protective gear, et cetera?
Right. The message he was putting out was essentially that the United States is in a good position to act against, to mitigate the effects of this virus, while at the same time he was selling these stocks.
Well, we want to thank you so much, Derek Willis, reporter from ProPublica. Just to end with the Wall Street Journal reporting Tuesday, corporate executives sold over $9 billion worth of stocks between the beginning of February and the end of last week. Jeff Bezos sold the most of the executives, 3% of his Amazon shares, worth $3.4 billion. And that does it for our show. Democracy Now! Is produced by an amazing team, most of whom who are working from home to protect themselves and the community. Democracy Now! Is an amazing team of committed producers and staff. Thanks so much to Mike Burke, Renee Feldstein, Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Tammy Warrenoff, Libby Rainey, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Hani Masood, Rina Nadura, Tamarie Astudio, Adriano Contreras, Maria Taracena, Julie Crosby, Dennis Moynihan, Miriam Barnard, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera. Special thanks to Becca Staley. Juan Gonzalez joining us from New Brunswick. I'm Amy Goodman in New York.